In this nugget, we take a look at additional storage features, including the working with offline files. This allows us to access network documents even when the network is not available. Figure that out. We'll also work with quotas so that nobody abuses their storage privileges and puts too much information on a drive. We'll also take a look at the volume shadow copy service, which is a great way not only to use with a backup solutions, but it's also a great way to restore files without having to even use a backup solution. Alright, to discuss offline files, the best thing to really do is just review what normally happens when I have a good connection to a file server here, which has maybe a file share on it. And then maybe down here I've got my laptop, and here's my little screen, here's my little keyboard, all that stuff. Doesn't look like much of a keyboard. Looks more like kitty litter or something like that. I don't know. Anyway, so how do I normally access these shares? Well, normally that's going to be just over the network, whether it's Wi-Fi, Ethernet, network cable, doesn't matter. But I'm accessing the files. And I'm being very productive during my day, which is kind of unusual for me. But anyway, so I'm opening these files and I'm saving them and everything's going great. And then all of a sudden, maybe the Wi-Fi router or whatever it is breaks. It just goes down. It's not working properly. And so now I've kind of got these orphaned files open on my laptop. And then when I try to save them, it gives me an hourglass for a little while, or a little spinning circle that Microsoft uses these days. And then nothing happens. And then eventually it'll say something, kind of an error message that the source is not available. And then I'll have to just save them on my local hard drive, maybe on my desktop or something. And then, of course, when the network does come back up again, I'll forget to update the network copy with the ones that I stored on my desktop. And then I'll have two copies of the file, one more up to date than the other, and then I have to kind of perform, hey, wait a minute, which one was the most recent one that I did? And then I have to look at the timestamp and all that stuff. Well, most of your users won't even go through that much effort. They'll just allow things to be inconsistent until everybody gets good and confused. The other situation that occurs here is not when we have a network problem or something like that. This whole situation here is not a problem. But I had been working with files across the network just in a normal way. And then I folded up my laptop, took it on a plane, and then I'm trying to work on a PowerPoint presentation for maybe a seminar that I'm giving or something like that on the airplane at 30,000 feet. And then I open up the files to where I thought they were, and oh, you know what? Those files were on the network server. Don't really have much of a connection at 30,000 feet. Well, both of those situations are where offline files comes in handy, because anything that we have from our share up here, we can copy to a local cache on our hard drive, on our laptop, or it could be for desktop computers too, but mostly we use it for portable devices. And then if the network does go down, well, I've still got a local copy here. Now, sometimes there's still sync issues and sometimes still some consistency problems with the situation where I'll be saving the file, trying to save the file after the network goes down, and it may still hourglass me for a while. Sometimes it will still prompt you with a message, and you'll just have to deliberately overwrite the network copy. At least in the interface, it'll look like it's a network copy. It'll still show you the location on a network share, and you'll be able to save it. Then what would happen is when the network comes back up again, it'll sync the saved local cached copy with the network version, and you'll be up to date again. Then likewise with the situation where you're traveling and you're trying to work on a PowerPoint presentation in the airplane, well, in that case also, you can deliberately choose to, let me remove this because there's not a problem, but you can deliberately choose to download or cache the files that you were accessing on the network so that you have a local copy, so that now when you're in the airplane, you still have a cached copy. You can make changes to it, and when you reconnect to the network after you get back in the office, it'll resync and keep up to date. So that's what really goes on with this, and it really is only good for network shares. And so anyway, that's the whole point of this. When files are available because you're disconnected or you're deliberately working offline or you're in an airplane or something like that, and when you reconnect, you want a good sync mechanism. And I would say that this is a really good sync mechanism. I've used offline files many times in the past. Been pretty happy with how it works. I think it's as advertised for the most part. Also, you configure this with offline settings, or it's going to be the caching settings on your file share. And then you can also adjust various settings with a group policy object. You don't need to go into a lot of detail with that. There's probably a few dozen different group policy settings for offline files, which kind of explain themselves. But I'll show you where they're located at the very least here. Now, let's go ahead and take a look here at an example of how this works. Here's the share that I created in our last nugget for the Fiesta Bowl. And if I right-click on this and go to Properties, we can go back to the Sharing tab, which is where you adjust this under Advanced Sharing. Having gone here, we got to the caching button. This no longer says offline files, it says caching. And then you'll see that it says, by default, that it's going to only make available files to users who are offline. Only the files and programs that users specify are available offline. Okay, so this means that if I'm over here, and again I'm just logged on as a specific user, and if I say, this file, I really want this, so I want to always make that one available offline, and if I check that item, it'll start a synchronization service where it will download immediately while we're connected to the network a copy of that one file that I selected. And then if the network goes down, I'll have that file available. These others will have an X through them, indicating that it's aware of them, but they're unavailable because I only chose this one file to be available while the network was down. So let's just go ahead and do that, actually. So I'm going to right-click here, choose Always Available Offline, and it starts a little service and everything. I had run it before, so that synchronization that you saw there worked very, very quickly. But depending on the size of what you're trying to make available, it could take a few moments for it to copy everything down to the local hard drive. Now here I'm also connected through remote desktop, so I'm going to simulate a network disconnection by disabling the network adapter. When I do that, of course, I'll have to just connect locally here on my Hyper-V server. So I'm going to go ahead and open the Network and Sharing Center, and just for the time being at least on the adapter, just disable that. So we'll disable it. And that kind of simulates for us at this point. I guess I'll have to enter in my credentials. And anyway, entering in my credentials there, it simulated that server was down now. So now if I go back over here to my client on my Hyper-V machine, then we'll just go ahead and make our virtual machine connection. And now it comes back up here. Okay, so I'll just go ahead and minimize this for the time being. And then I go back over here to this item, and now you can see that only that specific item is now available. And in this case, it doesn't show the other files with the X's through them, as I mentioned earlier, because I've never selected those to ever be synced. But it may show those if it didn't have a chance to sync anything else before we had the disconnection occur. So anyway, that's exactly what happened here. When I specified that I wanted the file available offline, it was. Let me talk about this branch cache item here. This is something that's very interesting and can be very useful in branch office scenarios where they're separated by a slow or unreliable WAN link. So what happens with this is people in that branch office, some user might open up a large file over that WAN link, and they have to sit there and twiddle their thumbs for 5 minutes waiting for it to download to their local computer so that they can open it up. Well, that's kind of too bad for them, but guess what? When that happens, it can cache it either on their local computer or on a central branch cache server in that branch office. And then when the second user wants to open up that same file, it actually opens it across the local area connection instead of going to the server over the wide area connection. And there's checks in place to make sure that it opens up the most current version and things like this. And it's not part of our current topic, so we don't go into a lot here, but I did want you to be aware of what that check mark was. And I have an enabled branch cache on this server, so that's why it's not available right now. I can also choose no files or programs from the shared folder are available offline, which is very useful if you have confidential data or secret data that you don't want to be able to walk out of the office, even on a trusted user's laptop, because that could still get stolen, and then the files might still be available for someone to look at. If you look at the client-side cache, which is where the offline files are actually stored, it's in kind of a special file system, a special file location that is on the local user's hard drive. It's kind of hard to decipher what's there. The files are all broken up into tiny pieces that don't really make a lot of sense, but people with knowledge could reconstruct that information. You can also encrypt those files, by the way, and I'll show you how to do that a little bit later on here. Then you can choose all files and programs that users open from the shared folder are automatically available offline, and this means that it just kind of makes a convenience for the user. So they never have to right-click on something that they would normally use and select an always available offline item. There's kind of an assumption made that if they open it, hey, they must need it. There's also this optimized for performance thing, by the way, that really only works with executables or DLL files, this optimized checkbox here. This means that once they open up the executable for the first time, it downloads it from the network, over the network share, and then it caches it locally. Then the next time they open up that executable or use that DLL, it actually uses the local copy after it checks to make sure that it hasn't been changed on the server. And that will help to optimize for performance so that it doesn't have to open it up over the network every time. Kind of wish you could do that for certain files as well, though. But at least it's there. And then here I've quickly cut over to a group policy object so you can see where the offline file settings are under Computer Configuration Policies, Administrative Templates, Network, and then offline files. You can see all the settings right down here. For example, you can specify that anytime someone makes a top-level folder available offline. All of the subfolders are also available offline. I'm not going to go over all of these because it's not part of the exam objectives, but there are some more interesting things that I want to talk about. For example, you can specify the limit of the disk space used by offline files. This can be configured locally on each client, but if you want to administer this administratively from a central location, you can do that right here. For security concerns, you might want to completely disallow the available of offline files. You could specify that option here. This is important. You might want to allow offline files, and then you can also encrypt the offline files cache so that even if someone's able to get to it, they would be very difficult for them to reconstruct any useful data out of it. You can also make specific files never available offline, maybe something that's more confidential. Maybe there's other files in the shared folder that you want to make available offline, but there's some things that you don't. You can specify those items here. You can remove the make available offline command available, remove the make available offline command if you want to, and then you can also change when things synchronize. You can see some of the synchronization settings closer down here to the bottom. This is one that's interesting, though. Let's look at configure slow link mode. With this one, I can actually kind of trick the system into having users always open offline cached versions of the files, provided they have not changed, even when we are connected to the network. A lot of times I've actually done that myself with really large graphics files or large Photoshop files, which could be hundreds of megabytes, some of them up to a gigabyte in size. I don't want to have to open that over my Wi-Fi every time I open that file. So by choosing something like slow link mode here, this is normally going to be something that we want to use only so that if we actually truly have a slow link, it'll revert to using the local version. But if I always want to use the local version first, and I think that's actually a good practice, then what you could do is to enable this item. And then what you do is you got to go down here. It's kind of hidden. You got to go down here a ways and go to the UNC path where it says show. Then what you do here is you enter in a value name, and it would be, you know, whatever the name of the share is, you know, whack whack, you know, DC Nugget 01, and then, you know, Fiesta or whatever I called the share, something like that, and then a value in this case of 1. That means 1 millisecond. So basically what this would tell the client machine once they get this policy is that if the network latency is a millisecond, then we're going to go ahead and use cached local copies. Well, guess what? Everything's going to be more than a millisecond. So this kind of forces it to use local copies instead. I kind of like that setting for a lot of purposes. Now then, over on the client side, what can you do to configure additional settings for offline files? If we go down here and click on the little arrow here to show hidden items, we can see that the sync center is there. If I right-click on that, I can open the sync center. Okay, and then this shows me the offline files item, and it tells me when it last synchronized and so on. What I can do with this is I can also go to the properties of this item, and I can choose to enable the state or disconnect it. For that one, you do have to be an administrator, which is why it's not available to me at the current time. And then I can also double-click on it and see the actual folders that are synchronized, and again, it'll just reveal them to me that way, so a couple of different ways of working there. One of the more interesting things here as well is I can choose to manage the offline files, and this is where I can say, you know what, for this laptop, we want to disable offline files. We could do that. We could open the sync center, which is basically what I already have here. I could go back here to look at viewing the offline files and see specifically which ones are available offline. In this case, it would be, you know, these files. And in particular, the one that has the little swirl icon on it. Yes? Microsoft calls the green little circular thing there the swirl icon. At least they used to back when this first came out. So those are some of the available options that we have there. We can specify how much disk usage we want it to use. Okay, so we can change the limits if you're an administrator if you want to. Sometimes if you do get synchronization problems or things get kind of weird, it helps if you just delete the temporary files and resync again from the beginning. This is where you can choose to encrypt offline files as well. And then if you have slow network issues, maybe you're barely in range of a Wi-Fi or something like that, or it's just a lot of network connection or over a slow WAN link, you can say how often to check to see if the connection is slow, and that does it every 5 minutes there by default. All right, taking a look here at disk quotas. The purpose of this, obviously, is that we want to limit disk usage. Even if you're an organization that has gigantic storage, huge SAN and everything, and a luxury of a lot of available storage, it's still the judicious administrator who will monitor this and make sure that no one overuses that privilege. So we can use quotas to make sure that that happens. A couple of ways to make sure that we configure this properly, and some of these are components of the same thing. One of those would be for Windows Explorer, for example. So I could just go into my server, for example, and I could go into a resource like this, and I could just say, hey, on a specific disk, I want to make sure that we don't over-abuse the storage on this. So I'm going to go to quotas with this right click and then going to the tab, and then I click on Show Quota Settings. This is a real simple interface, which is largely self-explanatory, but in brief, we can just enable quota management, and then if anybody goes over a limit that I set down here, I can deny storage to those people that exceed that limit. Right now, we're not exceeding anything. Now, why would I not limit disk usage, but still enable quota management? So that I can see a report of who's using how much space. You can still derive that kind of information by enabling quota management. And then I could say limit disk space to 1 kilobyte. Or look at this. That doesn't seem like much space. Let's give them a little bit more generous space. How about a megabyte, a gigabyte, a terabyte, a petabyte, or an exabyte? Wow. Look at the size of that, an exabyte. So let's just be generous and give them an exabyte. That just cracks me up. Who has an exabyte of storage? All to yourself or something, Anyway, so let's just, reasonably speaking, I'll just make it let's say a megabyte. Also, we can set a warning when they reach 500, kilobytes, for example, and the user will receive a warning then. You can log these to the event log as well. I do recommend that you do that, just to be able to keep track of what's going on there. And then for your quota entries, you'll notice that there's something going on here where we will allow the built-in administrator to have no limit. That's always there by default, and you don't want to lock out the administrator from putting files up there that are critical. So the administrator never has a limit. Now you can set up limitations for other users though, or exceptions if you will. So let's say Tucson admin 01. I think I have a user, there you go, a user by that name. I can click OK here. And maybe they're not a local administrator of this machine, so I need to set them up for a different space. Okay, so I might say either don't limit their disk space usage, or limit them to more than the other folks. Let's give them a terabyte instead of a megabyte, and we'll give them a different requirement. And of course, you can use your imagination or use whatever job requirements people have to adjust this as necessary. So maybe a supervisor or a manager would have a larger requirement than other folks, for example. All right, then quickly switching over to a client computer where I'm logged on as Tucson user 02, I've changed the permissions on this folder for NTFS to modify permissions for the Tucson user security group, giving this user permission to drag this file into this folder. Now, if we take a look at the properties of the folder or the file, we can see that it's 12 megabytes. That's well in excess of their 1 gigabyte limit, so that when I drag that over there, of course, I'm going to get a message, not enough free space. This will also log an event in the event log, although it's only collected hourly, so we'd have to wait an hour before we would see that in the system event log, just FYI. So anyway, it does a very good job of keeping track of that quota, and there's really not much else to it in those terms. Now, you do also have the ability to work with templates, although not in Windows Explorer, where you have the Quotas tab by right-clicking on a drive. So we'll get to that here in a moment when we talk about FSRM. You can also choose soft or hard quotas. The soft ones are where you just get a warning. The hard ones are where it prevents you from storing additional items on that drive, like you just saw a moment ago. And then there's also, in Windows Explorer, you can only set a quota on the drive. You cannot say, I just want this one folder to have a quota of 500 megabytes, this other folder to have 100 megabytes, something like that. For that, you'll have to go to the File Server Resource Manager. Let's go ahead and take a look at FSRM. And this is also where we will have our quota templates, as you can see. Now, I already have a quota on a hard drive, but nothing shows up here. And this is because this only shows quotas that I've created using FSRM. And probably for a higher level of administration, the FSRM is more recommended than working with Windows Explorer and drive properties. Okay, so anyway, we could create quotas here, and what I would do is to create a quota by right-clicking, and then I'd choose whatever path it was that I was interested in, and let's just say I'm interested in only that one folder. Then I'd click OK. The other thing to look at here is this item, because these look similar. I mean, I'm going to create a quota on this path Sure. And what's the requirement? 100 megabyte limit. Fine. But what's this? Auto apply template and create quotas on existing. Isn't that what I'm already doing? Well, the key here is that if I just use this item here, it's only on this path. If somebody creates some subfolders there, they will not be subject to that same quota management. So in other words, it's not inherited. It doesn't flow on down. This would cause an inheritance on not only the existing folders, but also any new subfolders that I would also apply. And you can see the quotas are already there based on the templates that I showed you a moment ago. So it's a 100 megabyte limit in this case. Now, if I were to go to create quota on path, then you could also choose to define custom quota properties, and I could go into the custom properties here. And this is where I could change it to, 1 megabyte, 10 megabytes, 10 gigabytes, whatever. Notice that this one does not go to exabytes and petabytes and all of that kind of stuff. I don't know why it went so high in the other one, but this one's much more sensible, I think. And here again also, of course, you can add a hard quota or a soft quota. You can also add the notification thresholds here. So we can say send an email at a certain time to the administrator, send an email when they exceed their threshold. And you don't mess with this stuff. This will automatically fill in the required information. So it'll tell them that it's exceeded their quota threshold of 100 megabytes or something. It automatically fills in those variables for you. Also, you can, of course, I guess I don't have an SMTP server configured, because I haven't configured one yet. So I'll just go ahead and say yes to send them, or to queue them up anyway. And then I'm going to go ahead and send a warning to the event log. Obviously, that's another one that's a good idea to keep in mind. I could also go to a command and run a specific command or script, such as, deleting temporary files that are not locked open or something like that. If I had some kind of script like that, I might want to work with that. You can run the command as a local service or any number of other services, just so you can make sure that it doesn't require that an administrative user is physically logged on to the console there, that it can happen without someone having to visit that machine. And then all of this will also generate reports as necessary as well. And this kind of goes beyond the FSRM quota management item. It'll also show you reports on any duplicate files that you have. That's another good indicator that you might be exceeding your threshold because, hey, I accidentally copied the same gigantic file to 2 separate directories. As a result, that's why I'm exceeding my threshold. And regardless, having clicked OK, then now we see that there's now a warning threshold here with an email and an event log, which we now have. So once I've done that, I've got an entry in here for notification, and I can just create this as necessary. Really, it's pretty simple and a cool way to work with this. If I suspect that I'm going to use the same properties again in the future, I can save everything I've just configured as a template, or I can save the quota without creating a template. Okay, and that's pretty much it. I now have a requirement on that particular folder instead of having to set one on an entire drive. You know what? While I'm here, let me show you a couple of other things. This is not really part of the exam, but these are so cool in FSRM, I just can't resist showing them to you. Look at this file screening management. We can set up file screens based on certain templates if we want to. Let's say we want to block audio and video files. Maybe someone's taken their entire iPod collection and copied them to the network server. Well, not anymore, because we're going to block audio files. We're also going to block you from putting your home movies up on my server. So we're going to block your video files. We can do all of these different types of things that we want to. Certain places, for example, you might want to block executable files so that maybe someone wouldn't copy a virus up there or something. Now, of course, there's ways of disguising that and sneaking in viruses anyway, but at least in terms of the raw executables and the like, we could block those types of things. So these sorts of things are very, very handy, and I might just create a new file screen here, and I might say on this particular path where we have I'm just going to go back to my Fiesta Bowl thing here. I'm going to click OK. I'm going to say on that one, block audio and video files, or block any of these other types of files. I don't want to say block image files because that's what I've got up there, right? But anyway, so I could block those things and save myself a whole lot of space and more tightly control the sort of data that's going into a given location. And if necessary, you can also go to custom properties, and this kind of explains itself, but you can say in addition to those kinds of files, also don't put in any, email files or, office files, or let's not do anything productive here. Let's take out any of the office files. Anyway, you get the idea. You can put in anything else that you think makes sense to whatever your requirements are. So I'm going to go ahead and create that, and there it is. Now we've blocked audio and video files. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my client over here, and I'm going to paste a file that I copied from off screen here. This is just a part of the clips that I used for my last nugget when we were talking about file resource permissions, NTFS permissions, and share permissions. Anyway, it's a video file. So now I'm going to try to drag it in here, which I have permission to do, but here it says, no, I don't have permission to do. So I've got the appropriate NTFS permissions, but because of the file screen, I'm still denied access. Another thing I want to show you, this is very cool, this storage reports management. One of the big problems we sometimes run into is that people have duplicate copies of the same files just in different folders or something like that. Now there's actually a couple of different ways of doing this and to manage that. One of those ways, let me go up here, would be go to manage and add roles and features and to install the disk deduplication feature from within file and storage services. So if I scroll down in here, you can see where my path is. There's this data deduplication item, and it will just kind of scan periodically, find a file that's duplicated, and then it will allow only a single copy of that data. However, it will not visually delete the second copy. It'll look to the user as if they're both still there, and yet there was really only going to be one taking up space on the hard drive. So that's a very cool feature that you can work with there as well. But going back to our storage reports management, there's a lot of different things we can do with this. I could right-click to generate a report now, okay, and I could say I want to look for duplicate files. Okay, and actually, let me do that. Let me create some duplicate files, because I don't have any yet. So I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to accidentally, on purpose, create some duplicate files. So I'm going to create all of these. I'm going to copy these. And then I'm going to go up a level and create another folder. And I'm just going to call this duped. Okay? So we'll paste those in there. Now we've got duplicate files in that location, and I want to scan for that. You can also look for different files by owner. Maybe we suspect that Tucson user 02 is scattering files all over the place, and they're really just putting too many files on there. Well, there's other ways of doing this, but boy, the report is the easiest way to go because it'll just scan for that user's files. You can also look for the largest files. You can also sort these according to largest files, for example, so you can see what my top 10 files are and how big they are, who owns them. You can look for files by owner, all that sort of thing. It's just a very fantastic little tool here. Then I could go to the scope, and I could say I want to look for just application files or any other kind of a file that I'm interested in. And I could also choose how. Oops, I guess I better specify something. Got to add a folder into this. So I'm going to add in I'm just going to add in my drive here, my entire hard drive M. Okay, and then we can just again specify what kind of files they are, and then we can go to delivery and send a report by email. Although we'll also create a storage format of DHTML so that I can view that in a browser. So then we're going to go ahead and wait for the reports to be generated and then display them. Or I can just let it take place in the background if I've got time to wait on it. I'm just going to go ahead and click OK now because it's a small drive and there's not really a whole lot on there, so I should be able to wait for that. All right, so I waited just a little while, and then it created this DHTML file for me, and then I open this up, and look at this. Now it's telling me my duplicate files report. It's telling me that I've got 7 duplicates around here. I can go down and take a look at what the actual files are. There they are. There's one in duped, and there's one in Fiesta Bowl here again. So I can get all of this information very easily generated. I just can't say enough good things about this new tool. And now for one of my favorite features of Windows. This has been around for a few versions of Windows now, but it's something called the Volume Shadow Copy Service. Now, the VSS is useful for a number of different things, including virtual machine snapshots. A lot of different products will use this, but of course, Hyper-V will use this, and when you create a snapshot of an existing virtual machine, it uses VSS to make this happen. And what Volume Shadow Copy is it takes a point-in-time snapshot, just like the word sounds, of the way certain data exists at that point in time. And this gives us the ability to go back in time at in a future point to be able to restore that data to the way it was when the snapshot was taken. That's why we're able to use these snapshots in Hyper-V. That's why we can use them in certain other products as well. They're very useful in backup operations as well. VSS Admin alone is not a backup, though, so I don't want you to have the feeling that Volume Shadow Copy on its own is a backup solution. You can use it in certain instances in place of a backup to restore data, but it does not archive indefinitely because it will run out of space, and then it will start to replace that older data with newer data on a first-in, first-out basis. But you can use it in backup operations. Now, Microsoft's own WB Admin utility, which is the Windows Backup Admin command line utility, which you can also use from a UI, it does use the Volume Shadow Copy service. The net effect of this is something like this. Let's say that I'm backing up a hard drive here, and let's say that it's, let's just put 2 terabytes worth of data. Now, on my very first backup, it's 2 terabytes worth of data that's backing up. Okay, and so it backs it up down here to my backup. All right. Now, how big is the backup? Well, it's going to be 2 terabytes if we don't consider things like compression and the like. So it's 2 terabytes. Now, the next thing is, what if somebody adds just one tiny little file here that's 1 megabyte? Actually, that's not that tiny, but anyway, 1 megabyte file. Well, with the volume shadow copy service, what would happen is, during the next backup, it does not back up 2 terabytes plus 1 megabyte. It only backs up some overhead data, which is not very much, plus 1 megabyte. And now my total backup storage space is 2 terabytes and 1 megabyte, roughly. So that's another advantage of using the volume shadow copy service, and it's very similar to what you get in an incremental backup. Also, Microsoft's own backup utility, which I mentioned, does take advantage of VSS, but you can also use third-party backup products. I'm using, on my Windows 7 machine today, the Acronis Backup and Recovery utility, and if I drag over here an interface from it, you can see that it's also capable of using the volume shadow copy service, and so most third-party backup products will give you the ability to use that. Now, besides these things, you can also use VSS for file recovery, and that's one of its common uses that I really like this quite a lot. It's going to have its own section here, in fact. For file recovery, it gives you the ability to have on-the-fly restore. So let's say that I've been working all week on a specific file. It's ready for a big presentation Friday afternoon, and then right before I'm ready to deliver it, I delete a file. Oops! Turns out I deleted the file I'd been working on all week, and if it's on a network share, it doesn't go into the recycle bin. Well, now what am I going to do? What I can do is I can actually right-click on the folder, and using VSS, I can recover a previous version of that file. In other words, the one that occurred the last time a volume shadow copy snapshot was taken. Now, it could have been a version of the file from a few hours ago. It could have been one from yesterday, but it's better than a full deletion of the file. It just depends upon how often you create your snapshots. That's really up to you. What you'll do with this is you'll schedule your shadow copies so that you have some reasonable amount of data that's quickly and easily recoverable and that's not too stale. And it's also going to be not limited to shares. In earlier versions of Volume Shadow Copy, it was only on shared volumes that you could configure this. Now you can create it on anything, pretty much. You can also do this to monitor large restore jobs, so that if you have to restore a great deal of data using VSS and it takes a long time, you can use this command. This is just an FYI. I could use VSS admin query reverts and then /4 equals and then a volume letter, okay, like C:/ or something like that, or I could just do a /all, whichever one applies. But let's go ahead and take a look and see how we configure this and how it works. Okay, so to configure shadow copies, what do? Well, just go into Disk Management is one way to do it. You can right-click here, and then you can go to Properties where there's a Shadow Copies tab, and you can configure from here if you like, or if you want to, you can just right-click on any drive, and then choose Configure Shadow Copies as an administrator, and then it takes you to the same thing. So regardless, what we can do now is to enable shadow copies on a specific volume, and Microsoft recommends that you enable the storage of the shadow copies on the same volume that you're creating this on, so make sure you have a little extra space there to account for that. It's always a good idea to have plenty of space anyway for things like defragmentation and also to make sure you don't run out. So I'll go ahead and enable this. And then we just get a message here saying that if we have high I/O going on, that we might want to customize our configuration there, and you could even place the storage on a different volume where there's not shadow copying. But for the most part, it should be okay here where we currently are. So I'm going to go ahead and enable that on drive M. Now notice that I can also go into the settings, and it's going to go up here, and then we'll go ahead and take a look at the settings. We can say the maximum storage unit right now, it's a gigabyte of storage that's dedicated for the Volume Shadow Copy service. I could click on Schedule here also, and then specify how often I want this to happen. Now, believe it or not, I actually work 7 days a week, at least 10 minutes a day. And so there we have 7 days a week that I might want to create these shadow copies, because I could work with documents on Saturday or Sunday or any other day of the week that I might need to keep track of the changes. Notice that it creates it at 7 o'clock. Really don't have to worry too much about a performance issue with this, because once you've created the first shadow copy, the rest of them only mark the differences, and it's usually pretty quick, and it can go through a lot of data without a huge burden on the server, unless, again, it's extremely high I/O. Anyway, we got the 7 o'clock one every day of the week, and then we would also have another one that takes place at noon. But of course, you can adjust both of those settings to whatever makes the most sense in your organization. So let me click OK there. Also, for the details here, we can just see that it is going to drive M. If you don't want it to go to drive M, you can't use the settings like this. You have to go into this, and instead of setting them up in the way that I just showed you here, we would have to choose on settings first. For example, if I go up to drive C, then you can see I haven't enabled shadow copies. I would have to go to settings first and then choose some other volume here. Instead of drive C, I could go to drive M or whatever other volume I've got available. Anyway, on drive M, you see that it's already created a shadow copy. As soon as you enable it, it creates its first shadow copy. And you can create, as many of these as you want to manually at any given point in time. Otherwise, it will just do so according to the schedule you have configured. Now, as I go into this, you can see I've got a folder here that's got my important files, and oh no, this document is way too important to get rid of, folks, or to have accidentally deleted. So if you take a look at the details of this, you can pause the screen if you want for a moment, but I'm going to share with you my plan to take over the world. This is what it's all about, people. I actually use it every day, and I hate it. Anyway, so we've got these, the plan to conquer the world. Now, let's say we did a couple of different things. Let's say that we were editing, and we said we wanted to replace these paragraphs, and then I didn't mean to delete this, but you know what? I got to go ahead and close. Hey, wait a minute. What did I just do? Oh, man, I deleted the whole second half of how to conquer the world. What am I going to do now? This is so easy to do. Now, you, of course, from a help desk perspective, you can do this for the user, but this is simple enough to even step the user through over the phone. Just tell them to right-click on the document and to restore previous versions. And there was a previous shadow copy made earlier today. Guess what? You click Restore. Easy as that. Then you just click on Restore. It's been successfully done. I click OK. I double-click it, and we can see that I've got back my original document. Now, the other thing would be, what if I deleted the document instead, and I'm going to hold down Shift so it deletes it and does not go to the recycle bin? Now what have I done to myself? Well, in that case, there's nothing to right-click on, so I have to right-click on the folder that contained it, and then I can choose to restore previous versions. And then again, I see a couple of different shadow copies that were created. You can open one of those if you want to examine what's in there. And I can even double-click to open that one to see, oh, yeah, that's the one I want. Okay, so that's the one I want, so I'm going to go ahead and restore that one. And all I have to do here is I can just copy it and then go back to the folder for my important files and paste it. So a number of different ways of working with this. This is just very slick, and it will help to circumvent having to go back to tape or other archival methods many times, at least for documents that are not, months and months or years old. You can do a quick and easy restore in no time at all here. In this nugget, we took a look at storage features, such as offline files. Remember, this is how we can access files with a locally cached copy of files that we've previously accessed over the network. Very useful if you're not connected to the network or the network goes down. We also took a look at storage quotas, which, remember, can be hard or soft. Hard meaning that people cannot store additional data after their limit has been reached. Or soft, meaning that they can still store data there, but they keep getting nag messages about it. We also took a look at the shadow copy service, the volume shadow copy service. This is very useful not only for backup utilities, but also so we can use it to create in-time backups and snapshots of our data so that we can easily restore it or guide a user through restoring their own data. Well, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.